Hi everyone, I would really like to start this video for saying thank you so much for all the support and love. I really can't believe that I actually hit 100 subscribers recently. So really from the bottom of my heart, truly thank you. But let's get into this video because as you probably have heard or seen or been playing, a new spec has been given to our dear Dragon Boys. And with that new spec, a whole new way to play the game has also arrived to the game. Of course, I'm talking about the augmentation evoker, the new support class that you can play, and instead of focusing on your own damage, you're focusing on buffing everyone else around you. So in this video, I would really love to talk a little bit about my thoughts about the augmentation evoker, and as well as the having a support role in World of Warcraft now. So first of all, I have to be honest with you guys. I decided to play an evoker and augmentation with the purpose of making this video, but I really just can't stop playing it. I'm having so much fun on this new spec that it's really taking over all my playtime. So if you haven't actually played it before, it actually is quite simple. The way the augmentation works is that you have a few buffs that you need to uphold and prolong, so they are up as long as possible. The more important one, or the main one, is Ebon Might, which increases the damage that you do, but also increases all your group mates' primary stat. It's a 10-second duration with a 30-second cooldown, so you won't have 100% uptime. But using abilities such as your Eruption or your Empowering spells will actually increase the Ebon Might's duration. Besides Ebon Might, you also have your Prescience, which gives a nearby a player, and it will prioritize the DPS player if you are in range, a crit chance, and also a chance to echo 15% of the damage that they are dealing to their target. And you can have up to 2 of these running at a time. So you can basically, in a Mythic Plus, you can buff both your DPS players. But DPS players are not the only one that you're actually buffing. So, for example, you have Blistering Scales, which give the tank a shield that will give him 30% armor, and then it has 15 stacks, and melee damage will have a chance to remove a stack, and every time a stack gets removed, well, he does area damage to all the mobs around him. You have Source of Magic, which gives, every time you use an empowering spell, such as Fire Breath, you'll give the healer mana. And then you also have a perma max HP buff or a movement speed, where if you use your defensive or your mobility abilities, they will enhance and get even better. So you're offering a lot to the group. And then you have your Breath of Eons, which is kind of like your big cooldown that you want to really spend at the right times, and that's where all the damage will come from. So with Breath of Eons, you will fly over all the targets, you will give them a debuff, which will accumulate a percent of your teammates' damage to the targets, and then critically strike the targets for that amount in arcane damage, meaning that it will bypass armor. So just to bring it back, the goal for you as a support role or as an augmentation evoker is to buff your allies using Ebon Might and Prescience. Then it's your job to extend the duration of those buffs, keep them going as long as you can. So just to bring it back, your goal as an augmentation evoker is to make sure your teammates stay buffed as long as possible, and also as much as possible. You want to really use your cooldowns, but it's also super important with the augmentation that you use the cooldowns in the right time, that you hold back sometimes in order to have a bigger burst window. And that's the really cool thing about augmentation, is that instead of actually having a burst like almost all other DPS players have, you instead actually create the burst window for the entire team. And you can't really play it. It's difficult to play the augmentation evoker wrong, because the rotation is really easy and really simple to keep Ebon Might up and going as long as you can, and you can definitely just throw your cooldowns out whenever you get them up, and your team will do fine and everything will be great. But augmentation also offers really advanced players and players who have a lot of dungeon and class knowledge to really shine, because if you realize that, well, you're playing with classes that has a 3-minute cooldowns rather than a 2-minute cooldown, well, sometimes you want to like hold on your cooldowns in order to like the teams can really like pop off. So I think this class actually, this spec actually hits a really good middle ground of like it's easy to get into, but the more dungeon knowledge and as more class knowledge you have, the more possibilities you have to like shine and really like help out your group and be really useful. So let's talk a little bit about more specifically in Mythic Plus and Raid. I just wanted like to throw this out that the augmentation is getting a nerf. Probably when you're watching this, it has already been nerfed. Most importantly, the buff it's giving out, as well as its survivability, has gotten like hit a little bit. But also the augmentation's own damage, like the damage you do through your rotation, has been buffed. The nerfs that you see here, like they're fair and they're good, but I really don't see how they will change anything about the augmentation being like a must-have in hierarchies. You're not gonna see them like go anywhere soon. They're here to stay. But this is also like super fair because like the augmentation is also like super busted right now. There's no denying that. And rather in this video, I would rather like look at the augmentation outside of its tuning, like how fun is it. So let's talk a little bit about like its role in Mythic Plus. I think when you look at the evoker in general, with both the other specs in mind, you kind of see a theme of it being like built for Mythic Plus, and well, it's not like it feels bad to play evoker in Raid, but it definitely feels like it's made for dungeon and 5-man content. And with the augmentation, it kind of becomes really clear. So in Mythic Plus, you can just buff away, and as long as you stay in the range of your DPSers, they will get the prescience buff all the time. As well as the you don't have to think about, well, who's getting the Ebon Might, because it's just going to give out to everyone. In Raid though, actually, the gameplay changes up a little bit, and it's actually something new that you haven't really experienced before in World of Warcraft. So you're actually much more focused on your positioning, and especially who is it that's getting you buff. So Ebon Might will only buff up to 4 other players besides yourself, and it will buff up the 4 nearest players, meaning that if you're positioned wrong or bad, you could end up just, you know, wasting 3 of that play slots on the healers, and maybe have 1 DPS buffed, instead of actually going over to where your top 4 damage dealers are and buffing them. Now this is something that will be definitely figured out if you are in an organized group, like you will sit down, but like when you're pocking, it is a challenge to figure out who to buff and also position yourself correctly and following them around if you want to really like maximize the damage. Besides those like 2 elements of like positioning, which is actually a huge, for me at least, it felt like a huge gameplay difference. Besides that, the talents and the playstyle stay the same. You wanna keep the buffs up and make sure you have Ebon Might up for Breath of Aeons for the big burst damage, and then you just wanna like make sure that you give out these buffs and you're up to date. One thing I really like to do when I was raiding was actually, with my augmentation evoker, was actually to put blistering scales, like kind of ping-ponging it between the 2 tanks. So when like, you know, right before they get hit by one mechanic, then I will put like the blistering skill on that tank, and then when the other tank was taunting the other way, then I will put it back on the other guy. But you can also, and this is something that comes with like game knowledge, and you know, you realize like what the tank mechanics are. If you're totally blind new to it, you can, and that's like the great thing about the augmentation. You can't just throw it and forget it basically on someone, and you will be like, you will have done something. But the chances of shining and actually doing that extra thing is there, which is really cool to see. And also, it's like what it like makes it so much fun and has made me so addicted to playing it, is all these little micro management things you can do to like really like shine and be like a better support. Talking about the support role, it's something I've noticed about myself when I've like been like playing this. I do like and enjoy support characters in other games. In League of Legends, I have really enjoyed Shen. I have loved the idea that I can just teleport across the map whenever someone needs help, and doing that, I enjoy to do that. As well in Overwatch, I played a lot of Lucio, who doesn't actually really have the healing potential that someone like Mercy maybe would have, but like is always around and also able to give the movement speed. So like those small like things we can help out, and I realized with myself that I like the feeling of feeling helpful, but I don't necessarily like the fact that your teammates' survival is solely your responsibility. And I think with augmentation, it really hits that really good like in between, where you feel like you're helpful, you feel like you contributing to the teams and their efforts, without feeling that like, well, everything is on your shoulders to carry them. So if you look at the augmentation, and like it's really like highlighted here with that the group and the augmentation evoker kind of becomes extension of each other. And with that I mean like the group's damage potential depends on the invoker's skills to upkeep the buff as well as using them the right time. A really good augmentation will, you know, track the cooldowns of the group and use Breath of Aeon accordingly. But the biggest weakness and like the balancing of the augmentation, as well as like the I guess the whole like support role idea, is that you can be like the best augmentation evoker to ever like hit World of Warcraft, but if your DPS players are not up to par, there's not really much you can do. You need DPS players to play that role good or just efficiently in order for you to like really pop off. I've also noticed now, like playing my Evoker and like, you know, going through lower keys and seeing DPS players who are not on the same like skill level. That like, for example, when a DPS player is like it dying, especially here in Tyrannical on a boss fight, it's much more punishing than if you were just two of the DPS players. And you know, it's punishing because first of all, you're doing very little damage on your own, but since all your your damage is like through buffing other people, losing a DPS player means that your second prescience just goes on your healer or the tank or something like that. You are going to lose a lot of damage by just one DPS player losing. So there is some risk involved actually taking the support role. And I'm definitely aware that that's not clear right now because Evoker is so busted. But if they get the tuning down, that is actually a worry I have with the support roles. It's like how much risk there is. You really, and like I'm afraid that it will become something you basically only play if you have an organized group, when you know the DPS players are up to par and they are good. But I also just want to point out with the whole like, you know, you doing very little damage, that it actually, funny enough, have become some kind of like form of relief for me. So doing very little damage like means that I don't actually, when my even might is not up, or I'm like saving it on the cooldown, I'm saving all my abilities, I'm not really buffing anything, I'm not really that worried about my damage rotation. Of course, you know, damage is always damage and you will still be throwing, but like you actually opens you up to do other support things. So I don't mind using my global cooldowns on off healing, for example. Or you can also CCing ads. You can I have a knockback, I can like, you know, actually fly over there and push them back and, you know, use my knockback to put them in better positions. It actually, you know, doing less damage, not being so focused on your own damage rotation, actually opens you up to doing a lot more like of these like support and like cool things. So personally, I think the support playstyle is like super healthy for the game. First of all, you know, it opens up the game for people who don't really want to deal with the pressure of healing and tanking, but also don't really feel comfortable in like, you know, doing damage, or they just simply, it doesn't interest in them. Now they have like a new spec with, it has a simple rotation. that's like all about buffing your teammates and their damage instead of like doing it yourself, and like when doing your own damage. And as I mentioned before, like it's kind of like hard to be bad at augmentation. Like even a player who just throws out the cooldowns without regards of other your teammates' cooldowns will still buff their damage and still like contribute to the group. So I think this whole like new role, this whole playstyle is like it's gonna like open up the game to a lot more like people. And also maybe push people into a little like harder content or like higher end content. Second of all, why I think it's like healthy is simply just because it's a new playstyle, it's a new way to interact with other players, it's a new way to play WoW, and I honestly think the variation is the key to this game's success. That you can just pick up all these different things and play these different things. So every time the Blizzard implements something completely new, I always like, you know, have support for that. There is no an argument against augmentation, and because they are taking over the meta right now. Them being a must-have in hierarchies definitely drips down to all key levels, and you can see it that like people are waiting in 16s or 17s for that augmentation worker that comes, and like, you know, you realize that you could just blast through it without them. And I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that it's good for the game that like one spec is a must-have, especially in the case when you have something like the augmentation and like the whole support thing, because augmentation being the top spec will define what other classes are in meta, because you want classes that matches the cooldown of the augmentation evoker. So that's why you see stuff like the Fire Mage and Shadow Priest, which, you know, are also doing a lot of damage, but with the evoker no one can basically compete with that. I wanted to like, you know, end this video just like, you know, saying like, yeah, it's a little bit worse than now that it's one spec, but in the future and hopefully near, I'm really praying that like we will see another support role spec in this expansion. I don't think it's likely, to be honest, but hopefully even more of these specs similar to augmentation coming out. There will be someone to compete with augmentation and maybe have their cooldowns in another way that have a better symphony with like other classes, and will actually buff those classes up in the meta. Just to summarize here, I think that Blizzard has done a really good job with the augmentation evoker. It is incredibly busted right now, but I think adding the whole support role, I think they've done a really good job with that. It breathes a new life into the game, it breathes a new way to play it and interact with other players. And I very much hope to see many more of specs like this later in the game, to give competition to augmentation, and also just to bring new life into the game, and hopefully also new players. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you like tried out the augmentation evoker, and I'll see you in the next video.